Welcome back to another episode of Culture FC, the weekly soccer show that's not really about soccer. We cover lifestyle, fashion, music, politics, all the things surrounding the beautiful game, just none of the stuff happening on the pitch. My name is Louis, and I am joined here by my two co-hosts, Alan and Brendan. And this week, we talked about futsal. What is futsal? Futsal is a five-a-side version of soccer that is played on a court. The reason we talked about futsal is that futsal has been so integral into the development of some of the world's best players, such as Ronaldo, Xavi, Pele, Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi. Some of the best players on the planet have played futsal, and they have credited it as one of the main reasons why they were able to get to where they were. We talked about futsal's global impact on the game, whether or not we think should be implemented in the U.S., as well as if futsal will ever be able to discover or cultivate the American Messi or American Ronaldo. Can't get enough of us? Make sure you're following us on Instagram at culturef.c to see some behind-the-scenes footage, things that you don't get to normally hear or see in these episodes, as well as some interesting stuff that we post pretty often. We also have our own clothing brand. It is called Treble. It is a soccer-inspired activewear and fashion line run by the three of us, and you can find us on Instagram at Treblewear. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to leave us a review on either Google Play or iTunes. It really helps us rank higher, and we would really appreciate it. If you have friends who like soccer, please share this podcast with them. The more people listening, the better we get at what we do and the better episodes we make. And that's it. Let's jump into this week's episode.
I'm going to start off this weekend for our three topics just because it's an actual perfect segue from last week, sort of. We're going to be talking about the main man again. Mohamed Salah is on fire. So
All praise the king.
All praise the king. And that's kind of funny because in celebration for his record-breaking season, Adidas did something kind of cool and donated his boots to the museum in London celebrating Egypt.
Interesting.
So his boots are now going to be on display. I think it's this coming week, so this week if you're listening. His boots are going to be on display, and it's going to be part of the kind of current events of Egypt. And it's going to be cycling through their past history and then kind of showing this current idol and everything that he kind of means for Egypt now.
That's crazy.
When you're talking, and then like when it's just crazy to me when you're thinking just like culture and like in the impact that soccer has on it. Like, who would have thought Mohamed Salah's boots would be presented at a museum in 2018?
Especially with the fact that like he's not coming out, he's coming out of nowhere, but he has been playing for a couple of years now, and like having one crazy season is now in a museum.
It's projected him into this kind of already historic status.
It's just adding another layer to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And adding another quick layer on top of that, he is also not breaking fast for Ramadan. For the Champions League final.
Wow. That's going to be very interesting to pay attention to.
Yeah, so cross your
that's
fingers
like,
for that.
That's another just perfect segue from last week's episode, right? Of this guy that's just kind of...
Damn, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Biggest game of the year, and he's still going to keep true to his religion. That's good. It's great to see.
I mean, it's great for the people of his same religion who are idolizing him right now. It's like, wow, this guy is so good at soccer, and he's not going to succumb to like the outer world and actually keep going with what he believes in.
No, I think that's a major point because it'd be super easy for him to just be like, oh, hey guys, it's the Champions League final. I want to make sure that like we win. But
mind you, he's 25 years old. Yeah. So this guy is not much older than us.
I actually really like that he's not breaking because I was reading just after that episode. I was kind of still intrigued a little bit, and I was reading some like negative comments on him. Of just how he's, like, his nickname is Mo, and they don't actually use his full name a lot of the times. Like, he's kind of accepted that, and people are like, well, then he's being kind of gentrified, or he's being more commercialized into the white culture. So I think this is a nice little kind of, like, stick it to them. And it's like, dude, no, he's pretty genuine, and it's just a nickname. But
yeah, I don't think he's the one who chose Mo.
Right.
Yeah, right. But still,
I just think I don't know.
It'll shut those people up.
Yeah,
I guess.
it's just like
nah.
dude, this dude's genuine. That's going to be a crazy story then if he does well in the Champions League final. This guy
like
is
2-3.
Imagine he's like
that'll be the final nail in that coffin of what we talked about last week, where people say like, "Oh, you can't play soccer if you're fasting." But clearly, if he does well, if he does well on Saturday, then yeah, I think that'll be the final nail in that coffin. But back to the museum, I think that's really cool. But one question I want to ask is, like, I wonder if it's because it's an English museum, their perception is a little skewed. But then again, if it's an Egyptian museum, I'm sure someone from Egypt is putting input into it, right?
Well, yeah. So part of the reason why his boots are being put in there is because he is an Egyptian that is abroad in London, and he's having cultural impact from overseas, kind of in Egypt. So it sort of plays together with just this. It is Egyptian culture, heritage, etc. But it also plays in with how important Egyptian figures have been for the culture, even outside of, and especially in England.
Yeah, for sure.
His general impact.
No, and I think that's great. I think that's actually that explanation that's really great, because if you think about, like, the impact of Egyptians on global culture, he's having a phenomenal impact. Especially like we talked about last week, he's sort of changing the perspective of that some people have of Muslim soccer players. So that's really cool. Yeah. I think he deserves to be in there. That's pretty awesome.
There's so many different facets of this that are kind of interesting to me. One being, I wonder how many people are going to be going now just to see these boots, these kind of record-making boots. And from Adidas' standpoint, it's an amazing kind of ad.
For sure. But then again, there's nothing even wrong with that, because if you're going to see the boots but you happen to stick around and check out some of the other artifacts, then it's a win-win for everybody. Yeah. Adidas wins, Mo Salah wins, the museum wins, Egyptian culture wins. I think that's really interesting. I like that. Yeah,
it's interesting to think of, like, these brand new soccer boots kind of contrasted with these old Egyptian artifacts.
They must look so out of place.
Yeah, so out of place.
Just a quick little last minute thing for Mo. The fasting ends half hour before the kickoff in Kiev.
Oh, wow.
But how much can you eat before? Because he's gonna.
Well, but he'll be able to drink water. So that is.
Hopefully, he won't be too lethargic.
Yeah.
Cross our fingers.
And to be honest, he's probably somewhat used to.
Yeah, right. If he's still doing it and stuff.
And the thing is, he's been doing it for. So we said Ramadan started last week, I believe.
Yes.
Or the week before.
I think last week.
It was the 18th.
The 18th it started.
If I'm not mistaken.
It was.
And 16th.
May 15th.
16th.
Tuesday.
First day of Ramadan.
Oh, okay.
So either way, he will have been fasting for a while, so his body should be used to it.
True.
When it, like, that day, you know. So no, that's cool. That's good. You want to hit us with the next one, B?
Yeah. Not as crazy as the Egyptian king, but as the world now knows, Arsenal have a new coach, right? Unai Emery.
I feel so bad for Arsenal fans.
And the interesting thing that I thought came out of all of this is he announced it on his website a day before Arsenal let it out. So he just came in and was just like, I'm the new coach. This is what's going to happen. And then they have now announced it today. And I guess I wanted to get your guys' perspective on, if you were an Arsenal fan, what if having that coach now announce it before he's even been announced by the team itself, do you think there's already going to be a preconception of what's going to go down?
So here's my thing. It's just in a world where everything is super commercialized, and we've seen even the commercialization of squad announcements with England coming out and making a music video for their announcement. I find it super interesting that there was a lack of communication kind of between the two. It's not a great start when you start just in general, you're starting off a job and there's no communication between yourself and the people above you. As a fan, it kind of puts you in a tizzy. You're just, you don't know what's actually going on, but it's interesting. It's kind of, it's weird. It's also weird. He has his own personal website.
Yeah.
He has his own Twitter and stuff too.
Probably, yeah.
That's weird. I don't know. Yeah. It just seems like he has. I've never heard of a coach that has his own website. He's promoting himself, kind of in a sense. But I don't think it's great. If I were an Arsenal fan, I'd be my head would just be exploding, because I don't think many Arsenal fans actually wanted him. So him coming out and saying that, and then Arsenal not coming out until the next day and saying it, kind of puts you in this position of limbo.
Right. I agree with you. I think he started off on the wrong foot, and I think it's we're in that age, right, where it's like you have coaches who have websites, and it's like everybody is their own brand. And so for Unai Emery, he is a brand the same way that Arsenal is a brand and a team, and he is also a brand and a coach. And it's like he broke the news himself first. Definitely didn't look good, but it also got a ton of hits to his website. So it's almost
they let it clog the traffic.
Was it actually a mistake?
Right, and so it's like it's very strange happening, right? It's like
that weird. It's hard to believe it's a coincidence.
Right.
Thing.
Yeah. True.
I don't know. I think that it'll probably blow over pretty quickly. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, but it isn't a great first look.
No.
One thing I saw that was really funny about him. It was like someone on Twitter wrote, Arsene equals Arsenal. The other person wrote Emery equals Emirates. Guys, I think I figured out Arsenal's recruiting policy. Oh, I laughed so much at that.
That is great.
Yeah, I don't think he was the right choice for them. I think that Arsenal could have probably found another better coach, but,
what are you going to do?
Whatever.
Yeah, I actually heard that Arsenal gave a phone call up to Patrick Vieira from NYC.
They did.
Wow.
And he came out and said, like, thanks for, like, the gesture, but he turned them down.
Wow.
Super weird.
There's also some rumors that he's leaving New York City.
Yeah.
They're saying that he might be going to coach. He might go. No, it's not even secret. The offer was apparently from Nice, OGC Nice, but I don't know if it's actually gonna go through. But we'll see. I guess something to keep an eye on. Lastly, for our last news topic of the week, this one was really interesting to me, and I happened to find this out by accident. In 2019, there is a league set to launch in Canada called the Canadian Premier League.
Whoa!
And it is I believe it's like the first modern organized Canadian professional soccer league that essentially they're trying to create their own top level league versus right now you have 3 different Canadian teams playing in the MLS because, there was nothing, there was no league in Canada. But the league's focus will be to fully Canadianize itself to improve the talent and the sport in Canada. So in other words, they're trying to cultivate talent in Canada for soccer and really just improve the sport in the country as a whole. As of right now, they have 6 confirmed teams, and they've been kind of releasing them slowly. So about a week and a half ago, I started following the Canadian Premier League on Facebook, and every couple days I'll see these new announcement videos of the different teams. So right now you have teams in Calgary, Alberta, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Hamilton, Ontario, Surrey in British Columbia, Winnipeg, and then in the York region of Ontario. And they're trying to, I believe, by next year, they're trying to have 8 to 10 teams to start the league. But it's phenomenal. I thought it was, really cool that Canada is starting to implement its first, top flight, proper Division 1 soccer team. Soccer league. And they've come out and said that they will have promotion and relegation, and they are also implementing a club-based structure versus the franchise-based system that is in the MLS.
Canadians, man, they be doing it right.
Jeez.
Not to pat myself on the back, but at first, like when you just brought that up, I had never heard of it. My first initial thought was, not so sure because Canada's population is basically made up between majority, like 3 cities, but majority 1, which is Toronto. But when I thought about it a little more, we kind of talked about this in previous episodes. I think that actually could create for some really amazing culture because if you only have a few cities, major cities where you can kind of build fan bases. You can really build some rivalries. Like Toronto itself could fit probably 3 or 4 teams. I mean, it's a huge city.
Yeah.
You can see that becoming a real hotbed for producing soccer talent and clubs and fans that are supportive because Toronto is such a diverse and multicultural city. It's amazing, the people there. So I actually think now that if it were to catch on really, and more teams it would almost be like a London type of thing where London just has it seems like a club every street block. I think it'd actually be really, really interesting and something that I definitely would want to follow.
So here's the interesting part about that is that they haven't really been placing teams in the traditional Canadian cities, right? So in all of that list I just read to you, not a single one
right.
I didn't mention Toronto. I didn't mention Montreal,
with the
nor did I mention Quebec City.
Yeah.
So, 3 major cities in Canada, yet it seems that the Canadian Premier League is avoiding those major cities, and I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
And, of course, you have Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal in the MLS, and so that's probably the main reason.
Yeah.
So you already have that culture instilled in the MLS for those clubs. I think it's not a great look, I don't believe, for Canada to already have 3 teams in the American League, but it's like at some point it'll be interesting to see if they ever jump ship and go back up to the Canadian Premier League. Then again, I don't know. It's going to be something to keep an eye on. But I also don't see what's stopping them from adding a Toronto team for the Canadian Premier League and a Toronto team for the MLS. You know what I mean? There's, like you said, it's a huge city, so why not have that, right?
I just hope that it does so well that the MLS is just like, dang, like, why are so many more people watching the Canadian Premier League and not MLS? And now we're going to have to start biting off them.
Yeah, kind of become this
That'd be the perfect
example for, no, I think it's cool. It was super strange when hearing the list of teams that those major cities weren't mentioned. Probably something like that. It also, maybe they're just giving more consideration to these smaller venues or smaller cities for now.
Maybe trying a grassroots kind of thing.
Right, and kind of establish a base before kind of targeting this larger market. But no, I think that's cool. I really do hope that picks up, because it seems like their general mindset is in the right direction of kind of what's the term, European what's the European trash or but the overall promotion relegation and general ideas behind it seem really cool.
Yeah. And from every video that I've seen and everything that's come out with, they've tried to make everything very wholesome. Like all of the 2 clubs that have names and have identities already created for them, it's York 9 FC and Cavalry FC. Mm-hmm. The one that I thought was really interesting is the Cavalry Football Club. It's the one out of Calgary, Alberta. They took their name from these, I guess at one point there was a bunch of farmers who lived in Calgary, and they kind of banded together to create a militia to help fight in a war. And so, they're pulling these names and pulling the identity from things within, Canadian history. And I think that's awesome. Like, you should have a very rooted identity into your city and into, be authentically Canadian.
Yeah. I'd love to see what the schedule is for this league, because Canada's a snowy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Snowy place.
And it's funny because on the map, all of these locations are at the southernmost parts of Canada. I mean, I would show you guys. I'd have to move my laptop. But they're literally like all very close to the border with the U.S. because of that. But
yeah, that's going to pose a challenge for sure.
But you know what? I think that Canada is such a big country. Sure, their population might not be massive compared to like other countries of the same size, but it's still a major country. They should be able to house a league and prosper relatively easily. You know?
And I feel like the Canadian people in general are pretty like nationalistic. They really do love Canada for what it is, and It'd be interesting because I feel like a lot of their major sports are all included with the U.S. and they're kind of their peripheral teams. Yep. I mean, even the Raptors this year had an amazing season and still were kind of looked over because they're kind of this Canadian team, I think. So it'd be cool to see a just Canadian-based league, and I think people will get behind it.
I think so too, because I think that there's a much bigger European influence in Canada than there is in the U.S., I guess. So I think that this is probably I'm just guessing here, but I think that the people in Canada might be a lot more receptive to soccer initially than people in America, where when the MLS tried to start.
Well, they have a lot of overlap with Europe, with like the English holidays. I mean, we have a lot of French influence there, so I think for sure that it'll pick up.
And for those of you who don't know, Alan was born in Toronto, so
shout out to 6
Canada boys.
Cool. So I think that wraps up the news for the week. So let's jump into the main topic. This week, talking about futsal. What is futsal? Futsal is 5-a-side soccer played on a concrete or, like kind of like a basketball court. Yep. And futsal has been a huge part of many soccer stars, like early foundation. Players like Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Neymar, Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Xavi, and countless others have all gotten their starts on a 5-a-side pitch, either through futsal or through street soccer. And the main question we kind of want to ask today is, like, can futsal be the answer to cultivating the American Messi or Ronaldo? right? And also with that, it's also kind of like, let's examine the impact that futsal can have on player development and its impact on the global game overall. So like what's different about futsal than regular soccer is that, like I said, it's played on a smaller pitch. It's only 5 players on the actual quote unquote field, and you have 1 in net. But the difference is it's a much faster game. You have to make decisions very quickly, work in tight spaces, and just improve your technical ability from the beginning. And the reason why this is interesting is that a lot of these players that I mentioned, they started off when they were kids playing futsal, and it's very common for South American kids to get their start playing futsal because, you know, it's just a little bit easier. You can put kids in a court and they learn how to play the game that way. And a lot of people have been making the call that should be implemented for every youth category. And an interesting example of this is with Cristian Pulisic. And he started also playing futsal when he was younger. His dad, Mark Pulisic, used to be a professional soccer player in the indoor professional soccer league of America. This was before the MLS existed, of course. And so his father, to make sure that his son learned how to play the game the right way, quote unquote, and to learn how to play futsal, he created the first futsal league in the Detroit area himself. He was like, all right, well, I'm a player. I'm playing in Detroit. I want my son to learn futsal. There's no leagues for me to put him in, so let me create a futsal league, which is pretty great. And he ran it on 3 basketball courts at the indoor facility where his team trained. And that he credits that, and also Cristian Pulisic credits that for a majority of his early learnings.
Listeners might, if you've never seen futsal, and I think that a lot of the younger generation today probably hasn't. I think in our kind of generation, Americans were more exposed to it if they had ever seen the kind of Nike Joga Bonito series that occurred. They really were putting, you can remember the videos of Ronaldinho playing as a little kid on the futsal courts, seeing Thierry Henry playing as a kid in his like hometown on the streets there, and a lot of people thinking like, well, what does this have to do with developing players? And it goes to with what you were talking about, Louis, of just futsal. If you've never played it, it's a shock when you actually get on a court with people that have, because it is significantly faster than the actual game on a field. I mean, the ball just flies. There's no long balls. And when you talk about developing players, it creates players that have to know where they are on the court at all times, because you can get scored on pretty quickly if you mess up. But also, you have to know your pass before you are even able to make it. So you think of these players that you've mentioned, the Ronaldinhos, the Neymars, the Robinhos, the Peles. These guys set a foundation very early on. I mean, when you're thinking about developing players, getting them in their prime years as very young kids, if you can already have the mentality of playing that pass before the ball even gets to you, that you're creating players that when you get to these older ages, you can translate that type of mentality onto a bigger pitch much easier.
Yeah, it's easier to make something from a smaller pitch to utilize it on a bigger pitch. In my perspective, never played futsal, still have never played a game of futsal in my entire life.
Yeah.
Never touched a futsal ball.
I mean, it's hard to come across here. I mean, where we played indoor, they just implemented this over the last year, right?
Yeah, last summer they implemented a futsal court. But to your point about developing the players, it's the timing of it is very interesting. The reason you get kids in at like 5 or 6 and you let them play futsal till they're like around 11 is because if you've ever, at least from my experience of watching youth players in America and youth soccer in America, you'll watch a game where there's like 7 or 8-year-olds out there and they play on a very big pitch, and all they're doing is it'll be one giant mob here chasing the ball and the ball's chasing over here. These kids aren't actually learning anything. They're just chasing a ball, getting kicked up in the air. And I've read reports of this where people have criticized American coaches because for kids, they're basically trying to teach them tactics at the age of 6. Right. And they're like, you have to learn how to do this and that. But the truth is, you got to teach them the core fundamentals of the game. And it also matches up from like a growth perspective of each child, right? So if you're 5 or 6, you're not going to hit your peak physicality until you're much older. So as you know, at 5 or 6, there's no point in teaching a kid to run as fast as possible and teach him how to be as quick as possible when he could lose that in a year, or over time you could lose that. Versus teaching someone the fundamentals at that age, and then once they hit 11 or 12, transition them to the big field. That makes a huge difference, because then at that point they already have the skills and their body's getting to a more mature point where now you can teach them, all right, now you have to be a little bit stronger. Now you have to be a little bit faster. And at that point is when you should start implementing tactics.
Yeah, because as a kid who grew up playing the outdoor all the time, I didn't really gain any real experience until I was about 12, 13 years old, until there was more tactics and we could understand a little more. If we had that foundation of just being able to know where your next pass is going to be, or like, you got to get rid of that ball quick, son. Yeah. Like, there's not like, okay, you're going to get the ball and then you're going to run as fast as you can with the ball all the way down the end of the field. It's just something that we definitely missed as an American, I think.
And what I think is super interesting, and I'm going to quote our friend Justin from the Grill FC episode, the artist over the athlete, and futsal very much so promotes the artist over the athlete. You can put the most physically capable person on a big pitch. You can expose them on a futsal field like you've never seen them exposed before, because the athleticism aspect isn't necessarily going to shine because it's so small. You need to be able to have that touch, have the awareness. So when you're talking about kind of promoting a culture where the beauty of the game comes out more than the athleticism of it, futsal is the perfect canvas for this to be expressed on.
And I think that's a major point, is that a lot of times, one of the quotes I was reading in an article about this exact topic, it was that, like, if you've seen the USA play, you know that they work their asses off. They work very hard at every single game. Like, you've seen the USA in a World Cup, they physically work as hard as possible. But they've lost a lot, because a lot of times in soccer, what decides a game isn't necessarily who is faster, who's stronger, who's more athletic. It's who's more creative, who has the technical skill to be able to break a game at any moment. You know what I mean? Like, if you've seen Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo play, you know that even if the game is evenly matched, at any moment, either one of those two players can do something creatively that will open the game up completely, and that changes the game. And so that's one of those things that a lot of people have been kind of calling for, is like, let's develop that creativity first. Let's develop the artist over the athlete. Let's develop those before we just decide to be the most athletic people. And I know it's a big shift for American sports, because a lot of American sports are 100% built on athleticism. You know, in basketball, you have to be the tallest, the biggest, the strongest, and that's how you win. Or, in football, the fastest, the biggest, the strongest is the one who wins. Of course, you have skill positions, but that's what they talk about. They talk about it as a skill position, not as a, you have to have major skills. I'm not saying that basketball players or football players don't have skills. I'm just saying that the general mindset is always get the biggest, strongest guys and put them to play.
Yeah. Well, to your point, a lot of like college recruiting for football, coaches just go up to schools and find the biggest dude. And it's like, we can teach him what he needs to know for that position. Yeah. But you don't necessarily need to have played. One of my friends at UMass, he played basketball. UMass, big dude. He said he got recruited for Ohio State to play football. The coach showed up and was like, hey, just saw him. He's like, you ever play football? He's like, no. He's like, hey, you want to come play football for Ohio State?
That's crazy.
He didn't, because he loves basketball. But that goes to show you that does not fly in the world of soccer. No. You cannot start playing at 18 years old and think that you're going to be a star, because that's not going to happen. Well, there are fundamental things that you have to know from birth almost for you to become a professional player.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because I've read stories of certain NBA players that I forget his name, but he came from an African country and he had never played basketball in his life, but he just happened to be really, really tall. Yeah. So right before high school, there was a coach that found him in his hometown and just trained him in basketball from the age of 17 to 18. Yeah. And then he got recruited to play college basketball just because he happened to be 6'5", 6'6". And it's like, you could never in your life pick up a kid at the age of 17.
I've never heard a story like that for a professional soccer player.
You will never, and I'll tell you this right now, you will never hear a story of a 17-year-old kid being discovered one day and then 6 months later is playing in essentially a semi-professional environment. Because technically college sports in America, I consider that basically like a Division II almost, because that's how much these kids play and how much they do it. But you would never see that in soccer. You would never, like, in soccer you have players who are 5'1", 5'2", who can play soccer. Right. You've never heard of a 5'2" player in many other sports. You know what I mean? Like, you that just doesn't happen. Like, in every sport, there is a basically almost like a quote unquote like cap to certain physical limitations that players will be allowed to be within to be in that sport. In soccer, it doesn't matter how tall you are or how, whatever it is. Every player can develop their game differently. If you're Peter Crouch and you're super tall,
I was gonna say
up front.
Peter Crouch,
be the one who heads the goals in.
But still be a specialist in certain things.
Still be a specialist. If you're Juan Mata, who's 5'5", 5'6", play in the midfield. Be quick, be crafty. So I think that is a major difference that I think Americans need to wrap their head around when developing soccer talent to eventually, hopefully, find that American Messi, American Ronaldo, whatever it is. But it will take a shift because that's kind of like what everyone believes is like the fastest, strongest, most physically gifted players or people are the ones who are the best. But that's not necessarily true.
And I think, do
you guys think we're too entrenched in this mentality that it'll ever change?
So I don't think we're too entrenched in it because one of the things that ended up happening was the United States Soccer Federation has mandated that for the development academy, at least, that their players start playing futsal from a very early age. So I know that their development academy isn't as far-reaching as some might hope, but within their development academy, players have to play futsal. Yeah. And we've seen this in Atlanta, like that pitch on the side of the MARTA, that pitch that we talked about there in the Atlanta episode, where they created this 5-a-side pitch right outside of the transit station there. That we've seen has been getting a lot of attention. Yeah. And even Neymar has a company called like Neymar 5-a-sides, and they've been touring the world doing tournaments of 5-a-side play, and it's slowly starting to shift. But what I find interesting is that another interesting topic that's been brought up is the comparison with basketball. Basketball in the 60s and 70s had an explosion of people playing it because you had basketball courts across the country being put into neighborhoods left and right. And so any kid can go to their neighborhood basketball court and get good at basketball.
Yeah, right.
And so, a futsal court is the exact same size as a basketball court. You can play futsal on a basketball court. Right. So I think that is a huge opportunity to develop players. Create futsal courts within these neighborhoods and allow kids to play on a 5-a-side field. I mean, we've gotten lucky that where we played soccer, there was a 5-a-side field at like Jefferson Hills, and it's it's grass, of course, but it's still 5-a-side with bylines and everything.
Still need to be quick there.
Yeah, even when you play, I have played a few games there, and it's amazing. As a kid who had never played that close quarters game, it's amazing how much better you get even just after playing a few games.
Yep.
Your whole mentality shifts, and that can totally be transcended to the bigger fields. And
right. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it builds the necessary building blocks of the foundation for creating good players. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about players, you can kind of cultivate good players, but I think it's important to see that a lot of international teams have been built on this foundation. I think of the World Cup winning Spain side. You have the Iniestas, the Xavis, the David Silvas. These guys there are the epitome of what futsal, kind of the futsal style, the one touch, the boom, boom, boom. Brazil has had selections that have been built on this same fundamental theory, right? So it has a proven track record for establishing not just players, but overall international teams.
I think that's a good playing off of that. I think a lot of people in America are starting to see the MLS growth and go, "Oh, this is amazing. This is great. We're starting to develop players. This is cool." And while that is good, you kind of eventually will have to break the walls of being this isolated soccer country like we talk about all the time, and how MLS is very content with being isolated. But for you to be able to cultivate talent that can challenge at the highest stage, and every American fan who's listening right now thinking about how the U.S. isn't in the World Cup, this is what I'm talking about. For the U.S. to ever really truly challenge for a World Cup, I think that futsal being implemented, whether it's through actual dedicated locations like where we've played soccer before, where they put a futsal court, or even just people putting futsal in to create street soccer all across the country. That's how you're going to find, those kind of players who are technically gifted, who then transition into a full-fledged player. Look at how much fanfare is being made over Cristian Pulisic across the board. Yeah. And so for him to have gone through all of a similar process like this, it should be the blueprint. It should be the stages that everybody takes into. So when all you hear people talking about, oh, how do we cultivate a great team? Well, you have a player who everybody's already touting as the savior of American soccer. Follow that example.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It's not like it's hidden. He talks about it often. There's many articles on the internet about it, and you see a blue, like, it's worked really well for him so far. They're touting him to be making a move to a big Premier League club soon. So it's like, why not follow that mentality?
Yeah.
But I think one of a good question is there something that needs to change for us to get into that mentality? Or is it just a matter of time before it starts to seep in?
I think time. Because I know the family I nanny for, their kids now. I mean, he's in 8th grade. He's in a futsal league as well as an outdoor league. Same thing with the 17-year-old. So I think that, I mean, granted, they are on more of a maple team, as we would say back in the day. I think that these the Framingham youth and everything, the youth teams will start to realize that, wow, like these kids who are playing on these different teams are playing both indoor and outdoor, and it's actually futsal. It's not just like your normal indoor soccer. I think that over time it'll start to seep through, because who doesn't want to produce another Pulisic, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think that it's a matter of time. It's also just there needs to be a little bit of onus on the people that are higher up in the footballing tier in the United States. I know Orlando City, they've donated a few outdoor futsal courts, and I love seeing that, because I don't want to say the onus is on MLS teams, but the onus is on the USSF and people to kind of put an effort and put the money that they have behind just creating overall courts around the country to help kind of introduce that aspect of the game to Americans more. I think that would be a great way for the USSF to invest money and build for the long term in creating these courts. I mean, you see basketball courts everywhere, and you oftentimes see tennis courts, but it'd be really cool to just kind of find somewhere where you had futsal courts for kids to be able to play in, and adults, whatever it may be. But that would really help, I think, in the long run for the U.S. to see some great progress.
For sure. One interesting aspect that I thought of is, in America, at least in the upper half of America, I mean, I'm talking about geographically, we have winter. So, like we said, you can't really play soccer year-round in certain aspects, especially not here in Boston where we are. So I think futsal can be a very clever workaround for a lot of the teams in the northern part of the country. Right. You can have young youth players, if you really want them to, youth players be playing outdoor during the season, but in the off season, put them on futsal leagues, put them on futsal teams to cultivate those skills simultaneously. I think it'd be a good workaround because we have winter to deal with, And
I think a lot of people would say that there currently is kind of this indoor. There people are still play indoor soccer here in the U.S., but the indoor soccer here in the U.S., at least most of the ones that I've seen, these kind of boarded up indoor soccer facilities don't get mistaken that is nothing like futsal.
No.
The courts are smaller, sure, but they're not as small as a futsal court, and there's an added kind of safety net of having the walls and the ball never going out of possession. What makes futsal so amazing in producing talent is you can very easily lose possession if your passes are misplaced. With an indoor boarded facility, that's not really the case. I mean, you can hit it off against the wall and still have your teammate get the ball or yourself get the ball. That doesn't necessarily produce really good footballing knowledge, right? So I think that there's a major difference, and you always see a lot of locations that have this indoor boarded facilities, but you don't see the ones where it's just lined small courts or small turf fields. And that change needs to happen. I think that getting rid of the boards, even because there are a lot of places that just have boarded indoor facilities, get rid of that, and you might see a change. There alone, you might see a big change.
I agree with that. I think that that's a big point.
I mean, it's funny because I have this conversation with just people who have played soccer before, and oftentimes, if you've ever played a competitive soccer game, you would never dare use the wall in a boarded soccer game. I will lose the ball before I hit it up against the wall, just because it's to me it just seems like I'm cheating the game. But when you see people that have kind of never played in a competitive stance, they'll use that wall like it's the only thing they know how
I
to
grew up
do.
using that wall, bro.
Right.
and so I think my perspective is the fact that I never played futsal.
Right.
I only ever grew up playing indoor on these boards. I was like, oh, well, these boards are going to add to my strategy. And it really takes away from you as a player, because then you have that crutch of
that doesn't translate to the actual game at all.
Because you could bank a pass off and you can get it by a defender and your guy can still get it. But if you attempted to get it around another defender, that ball's going to be picked off or it's going to go out of bounds.
It's almost a completely different game, even if you're just booting shots, right? I mean,
exactly.
Other times you're losing a game and you're kind of just ripping shots and the ball deflects back to you or to one of your teammates. That doesn't happen.
It almost takes the finesse out of the game, right? Like if let's say you're playing at center back and you're trying to send your forward a long ball, a lot of times what happens in these indoor boarded games is you're going to boot that ball and hope that it maybe hits off the wall onto the path of your attacker, versus you having to pick off the perfect pass for it to drop perfectly for your forward. That's what soccer is, not some indoor boarded version of hockey.
Right.
Right.
It's closer to hockey than it is.
Yeah, I grew up loving that shit, dude. It was so much fun.
It is a lot of fun, but when you're talking about producing players, it doesn't really help.
Definitely sent me back so many spots in terms of where my development was. It was awful.
It'll be an interesting shift to see if it does come up and does actually end up happening. But there's actually been a lot of focus on professional futsal in America recently. There is a league called the Professional Futsal League, the PFL, and they were supposed to start play in 2018. And Mark Cuban actually invested in this league. So in other words, you have a big-time investor like Mark Cuban backing you. Yeah. This was supposed to be a thing that really took hold and went forward. Unfortunately, there has been no update about the PFL in 2 years. And so their website's still up and it looks amazing and everything looks awesome, but there has been very little news about this league in 2 years. So who knows what's going on behind the scenes. But the reason I bring it up is because clearly people are seeing the value and the interest in futsal. And so I wonder if we'll ever get a legitimate professional futsal league in America, but I do think it might be too early for that.
Yeah. Does the U.S. ever compete in the futsal world tournaments?
I'm not too certain, to be honest with you.
I've asked because I can think of almost every other country in the world having a team, but the U.S. is not coming to mind. Yeah, it's interesting that the U.S. doesn't compete on that front. I mean, you think of if you want to ever see really cool soccer games that just are filled with tricks, it's a futsal game, international futsal games.
Honestly,
you see freaking flicks that are just ridiculous.
It's like
rainbow goals.
It's like watching a different game. Yeah, it's like you want to go watch some real highlights. You want to see those crazy things. Go watch futsal.
This is for real. But I think that what you said is about how Americans don't usually participate in it. I think one thing to think about too is I feel like some people, when they hear futsal, they almost dismiss it as if it's this it's just like indoor soccer at 5-a-side. How is that going to help anything? But when you realize that there are actual organized futsal leagues and there is the Futsal World Cup and there's all of these legitimately organized sporting events around futsal, that's when you realize that it's not just some small little kids game or it's not just some off to the side thing. It's a legitimate sport that runs parallel to soccer. Yeah. And so you shouldn't dismiss it because there are some phenomenal athletes who play futsal. Yeah. To wrap it up, should futsal or 5-a-side be mandatory for all youth players across the world?
It's hard to say mandatory, but I think for sure. I think that there should be more of an emphasis on it for sure. I mean, it has a proven track record of producing players. It's no coincidence that Brazil has produced so many players, and they all seem to have the same backstory of, I started off playing futsal for XYZ club, right? So I think that mandatory, we could make it mandatory, and maybe we'll see some more talent come out. But for sure, I think that if not mandatory, it has to be required for you to have played at least a year. You know what I mean? It's something that I really do think has impact on producing really artistic players and really skillful players. So I think for sure.
If you look on the professional futsal website right now, couple of the top three people that they have of like, why should I play futsal?
Yeah.
Pele, Ronaldo, and Messi. And that should explain it at all. I mean,
wow, that's awesome.
Definitely not mandatory, I think, but I think that every youth soccer development should have a futsal season going on in the winter when kids aren't playing.
I think if I'm a coach and I want to produce really great players, I would make sure that my players are playing in a futsal league.
Oh yeah, if I was just like a dad coach, be like, hey guys, winter's coming up. I don't know what you guys are doing, but you guys should play futsal.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I think it should also be maybe not mandatory, and also maybe not in just futsal. I think that street soccer and five-a-side soccer as a whole, whether it takes place on a court, whether it takes place on a small turf field, as long as it's legitimate, real five-a-side football, soccer, I think that should be given a lot more focus than it currently is.
Especially for younger ages.
Especially at the younger ages. And I think that, like you said, the track record's proven. And if you want to say, but we're Americans, that doesn't work for us, that's also a lie, because you have Pulisic, who's American, who is everybody's grand savior for the U.S. men's national team, who followed the same footsteps. He played futsal, he learned the skills needed, and then went on to do amazing things.
Right.
And so I think that if there ever is going to be an American Messi, an American Ronaldo, or even another Pulisic at any point in America's soccer history, it's going to have to be because of the added focus to five-a-side soccer.
Right. And in no sense, I don't want people to think that we're bashing on the development of American soccer. I think that this is just another thing they have to add in to get to the level that other countries in the world are at.
Definitely. I think that, like we said, we've talked about the growth of American soccer basically every single episode that we've recorded. So we know that it's there. It's just a matter of how do you take it from here, where we currently did not qualify for a World Cup, despite the fact that we have some phenomenal players, which we all agree the U.S. men's national team is pretty good. Yeah. It's a pretty good team. Yeah. But for them to miss out on a World Cup, that's not a great look. And for you to take the step of not even qualifying for a World Cup to eventually winning a World Cup, that is such a huge gap that it's going to have to be closed somehow.
Right. Yeah. Right. And this is definitely one of the glaring pieces that are missing.
For sure.
And that's it for this week's episode. Let us know what you guys think about futsal. If you think that it is something that should be mandatory for children to be participating in at young ages, why or why not? Have you ever had any experience playing futsal? Let us know in the comments below, email, DM, wherever you can reach us. As always, be sure to leave that 5-star review, and we'll catch you next week.